Hello and welcome to Microsoft Hates Greg. My name is Greg Deckler, and today we're going to be taking a look at what I consider kind of a basic DAX problem, but it comes up in the forums in one form or another quite a bit. And it's out there in the quick measures gallery. I have it called Lookup Min Max, which is what I called it at the time. Probably a better term for it is a double lookup. And so the basic concept behind it is, let's say that we have a table of stuff, right? And we want to, but we want to summarize that table, and we want to find out what item has the minimum value and what item has the minimum or the maximum value. And so the double lookup is, okay, I got to look up my minimum value, and then I need to look up the item that's associated with that minimum value or the maximum value, right? So again, this comes up in all kinds of different forms. The one that recently came up is this one, where let's say I have different order IDs, right? And I've got some dates for those order IDs, and I have a status on those dates, right? And so the ask was, I want to know for every row, I want to know what the initial status of the order was and what the final status of the order is, right? So this one's this one's easy, right? So I need to find the minimum date, and then I need to grab the status for that minimum date. And then the same, I want to know the maximum date and then the status on that maximum date. In this case, there were three different things for this order. So the minimum date here is 3/18, is an open order, and on 3/28, which is the maximum date, it's invoiced. All right, so let's take a look first at final status. And I will zoom in. I will not forget. I will always zoom in. I apologize for people when I don't do that. So the first thing I do is I'm grabbing my sales order, right? Because I don't want to include any other sales orders. So I grabbed my sales order in context with using just max. So then I can filter. In this case, I used all selected. Sometimes you might need to use all. I filter my table where my sales order ID equals my sales order. So I'm only going to grab the rows that are associated with the sales order that I'm interested in. All right, so here comes the first lookup, right? Min date. Well, it should be max date, but I didn't change the variable name. But anyway, ignore that. So I'm grabbing, because I just copied and pasted the code from one to the other when I originally created this. So that really should be, say, max date as the variable, but that doesn't really matter. Anyway, so I grabbed the max X from that table that I filtered, right? And I grabbed the snap date. That gives me my maximum date for that order. So now my result, then I can just grab, I can use either min X or max X in this case, because I'm only going to filter down to one row, hopefully, right? So I use a filter of that table where my snap date equals it should be max date, but it's min date, right? And I return my sales order status name, right? So there's the second lookup. And then I can return that as a result. And then as you can see, that returns my final status of, for this one, the final status is delivered. So delivered, delivered. The final status for this one's invoiced. So all rows are invoiced. Right, now let's take a look at the initial status, and this one is an optimized version of it, or at least somewhat optimized version of it, because one of the problems that they were having is that, imagine you have millions of rows, right? And you have a measure that has to go through this calculation for every single row in this table, right? It can take some time. So one way that you can optimize it is to do something a little bit more DAX involved. So I still grab the max for my sales order, right? In this case, then I use summarize, all selected query one, and because I only want to bring back certain columns. I only want to bring back the columns that I need, because that returns the minimum data footprint that needs to be loaded up into memory, right? So let's imagine that this table is really, really wide with a bunch of columns, but all I need is the sales order ID, the date, and the status, right? All the rest of it I don't have to worry about. So in this case, I'm using summarize. You could also use select columns here instead of summarize, but it's a lot more typing because you have to type out the name of the column, and then the column, then the name of the column, the column, name of the column, the column. Kind of redundant. So I'm just using summarize here to do basically the same thing, where I'm just returning the three columns that I'm interested in. So again, all I did was wrap my all selected with summarize, got my three columns that I need, and I filter it to where the sales order ID equals the sales order, right? And then again, I grab my min date, in this case it's correct, min X, of that table, and the snap date, that's the first lookup. Second lookup, I can just do, I've already filtered this to the sales order, right? So I just have to find in that table, the date is equal to the min date, and grab the status, right? So that is a fairly basic I would say DAX calculation. Now I'm going to be covering in a later video kind of a more involved version of where it involves a double lookup, but there's some additional kind of complexity with it. But one thing I wanted to note here, because again, with a measure, you're impacting the user. So let's say you have millions of rows, and let's say you want to return every single row, in a table. Well, the measure calculation could take a while, right? You're impacting the user's experience, right? Maybe it comes back in 60 seconds, but 60 seconds is a long time to wait when you're a user, and the users get impatient, right? So this is a perfect example of where if this is not dependent upon like some kind of slicer that you have up here where you want to know, okay, if only between these dates, what's the initial status and the final status, right? There's nothing dynamic like that going on. This is a perfect use case for a calculated column. And I know there were people that will scream their bloody murder that I come bring up calculated columns. The calculated columns are very useful in this case where you have a measure that's taking a long time to render. Whereas, okay, if that's 60 seconds, if I can push that to when the data set refreshes, and it's 60 seconds extra to calculate that as part of refresh, then the user experience is a much better UI UX experience, then that's a win, right? So you can do it as a calculated column, and it's very similar. These are, I think I used the very simple initial status. I didn't optimize these, but again, basically, I grab my sales order ID for the current row. I filter the table to that sales order ID. I'll do my first lookup, min-x, do my second lookup, min-x, filter where the table equals that date, and grab the status, right? Same thing for final status column. And I'm going to zoom in. And the only thing that's changed between the one we just looked at, and this one is that first min-x is now a max-x, because I'm now grabbing the maximum date. So there you have it. That is the double lookup in Power BI. That's all I have for this video. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.